All right, we'll see. We'll try and get started here. And I'll try and watch the feedback there with the wind. So a couple of announcements just before we get started. We have a fair amount to go over for this announcement. And we also have a fair amount of speakers. So I'm just giving a heads up. This is going to be a little bit longer event than we normally do. We'll certainly take questions at the end. Also just want to highlight, I think we're fine with rain. There's a little bit of wind, so we'll see if we can keep those from falling off and whatnot. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, we're here today, in summary, to address one of the biggest challenges facing cities in America and facing Albuquerque, and that is the housing challenge. This is not specifically about sort of the unsheltered and homelessness. This is about the other side of that equation. This is about actual housing. This is something we have not talked about in several years, and that's why we are doing that now. Because it's time, and also it's because we have a plan. This is the largest housing program that we're going to talk about that our city has ever embarked on. And it has multiple components. There are multiple partners involved, and we still need lots of help from a bunch of other partners. So let me start by saying there is no doubt that Albuquerque is in a housing crisis. We know that over half the renters have seen a 30% increase in the amount of income they have to spend on rent. That is absolutely unsustainable. So I do want to acknowledge one thing. I do think historically we have been treating this problem with sort of a Band-Aid when we've needed, a major limb amputated or whatever analogy you want to use. This is a major issue and it deserves a big time plan to deal with it. It is not about 40 units of housing. It is not about a sanctioned encampment. We are talking about an estimated need of between 13 and 30,000 units of housing. This is a problem our city will struggle with for the next decade, structurally. That's not a choice. The choice is how we deal with it, and that's what we're announcing today. Now, our Office of Equity and Inclusion has conducted an in-depth housing needs assessment. You can see this, it's online. We did talk about it last Monday. If there's questions on this, we can talk about it. But we also know that there are deep disparities in our city when it comes to this housing need. It is absolutely disproportionately affecting African American and Indigenous individuals with respect to home ownership opportunities. And it's a major contributor to the racial wealth gap. And there are recommendations from this report that we've worked into this overall plan, but I'm referencing last Monday when we announced that component with respect to Indigenous Peoples Day. Also, the city has been working on this program, so I want to emphasize City Council behind me, all the staff, all the entities, even this amazing structure behind me, which is for deaf and blind individuals for needed housing. We've all been working hard on this issue, but like a lot of challenges, we're like in a rowboat against a tidal wave. And so we've got to deal with the tidal wave, and that's what we're going to talk about here today. So we're here to announce the Housing Forward Albuquerque plan. This is a bold, multi-pronged approach to address the housing crisis head on. And this plan sets a goal for city and city partners to create 5,000 new units by 2025. Now we know that is not that far away. And that is an extremely ambitious goal for us, but it's something we think we can be able to hit. And this is the largest step in history that the city has ever taken with respect to housing. Now, we know that to do that, we have to also deal with breaking down barriers to housing access, to putting in protections for renters. These are all aspects of the housing situation that we also have to deal with. It's not just about units. It's also about facilitating the creation of much needed housing, but also the path with which people can find housing and stay in housing for residents from all walks of life. So the Housing Forward Albuquerque plan is meant to meet the immediate and long-term needs of the city and make sure that the city is a place that folks from all walks of life can call home. So the components of this plan we're going to dive into a little bit. But first and foremost, it is about increasing the supply of housing. As I mentioned, when you're up against, and there's multiple studies, so that's why we're saying 13,000 to 30,000 needed units. It depends on which study you use, but the answer is we need way more than one particular facility or one particular project. So we're doing a couple of things. First, we're going to try and convert commercial office space to housing. And so we're proposing a $5 million fund to do that. That includes state and federal investments to facilitate 10 conversions. That's about 1,000 new units by 2025. That also includes hotels. So it's hotels, office buildings, converting those to different forms of housing. They could be, we'll see if they're supportive or subsidized and all of the above. We're just telling you at a high level, we think that's what we can accomplish at best. Now, we also know that this means, how do we get to the other either 8,000 or, I can't quite do all the math on that, or 20,000 homes that we need? This is where we really have to look at where we're going as a city with respect to zoning. Right now, our zoning code will never allow us to meet the housing demand in the city. So I just want to be clear, the status quo will never allow us to eliminate this housing challenge. In the status quo by ordinance is the IDO, the Integrated Development Ordinance. So if you want a place to advocate, if you want a place to change policy, if you want a place to argue, it is all about the IDO. That controls the future of our city when it comes to housing. And so that is now going to be in the crosshairs for a lot of these policies. So we are proposing that we need to rebalance our zoning codes to accurately reflect the needs of housing in our city. And there's some basic things like casitas that we have to make sure are allowed. And there's also different forms of multi-unit housing types that we just have to enable to meet demand for housing. And these are recommendations that have come from a wide variety of groups, whether it's advocates who fight for folks who need housing, or frankly, housing developers and our Urban Land Institute, who've been saying for years that the City of Albuquerque zoning code will never allow us to meet adequate housing for our community. And they're right. And so we're going to listen to them, and we're now sending these proposals down to our partners at Council to work through. Now, we're going to hear from some folks on this, but I want to touch on a few other aspects because it's about enabling that future growth in the private sector. That's the zoning component. But it's also about a workforce. We also don't even have a housing workforce to build these houses or convert these units. And so we are going to use our JTA program and work with our building trades to try and train 250 new workers that will be specifically available for housing conversion and rehab. Now, the last component of this is about consumer protection and making sure that people who are in housing can keep that housing as best they can. So we're going to ramp up what we're doing at our Consumer Protection Office to enforce existing laws and propose changes to protect renters from predatory practices. We're also going to aggressively enforce anti-discrimination laws based on source of income. So you can't discriminate. It's against the law to discriminate if someone is using a housing voucher. And we're going to start enforcing that. We're also going to look at these issues around short-term rentals. We're having rubs there with what they can be used for and what they cannot be used for. That's also a national issue, by the way. And we also have to ramp up nuisance abatement. We're going to start cracking down and cleaning up properties that are hubs of crime. And you've heard me talk about this, whether it's parking lots or whether it is hotels or whether it's vacant properties or strip malls. If your property is being used for drug trafficking and so forth, we are going to start treating you as a component of a criminal activity, not just as a violator of building codes. And this matches with what we announced earlier with respect to downtown. Lastly, we're launching the Housing Sustainability Fund. This is going to be $750,000 to help property owners and tenants actually try and meet some of these rental disparities. And finally, we're going to need help. Historically, the state of New Mexico and the city, we're all missing a zero when it comes to the amount of funding we put into housing. And if you look at what we do, we try hard. We put in 40 million, or we put in 10 million, or we put in 25 million. None of that is going to make a difference when you have a $30,000 unit housing gap. So we need that to be 400 million. That is literally what it's going to take to work on this housing problem. And we can look to Colorado. Their state just put in 250 million into housing. So the reality is we just got to grow up as a city on this. and that means we also have to fund it appropriately. So we'll be working with our legislative partners on that in the upcoming session and see where we can go, because this also is an issue, of course, in Santa Fe. We know it's an issue in other cities around the state as well. So we're fortunate to have the chairman of our city council. He knows way more about this than I do. He's been on these issues, frankly, for decades, and I know a lot of us actually were not maybe listening as much as we should have been. So I want to bring up Ike Benton, because he's been saying this all along, and in some ways, in many ways, he's right on this issue. And so now we are behind him, and we need his leadership to get a lot of this through council. Councilor Benton.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks everybody for being here today on this beautiful New Mexico fall day. Yeah, I kind of worked over the years as an architect before my time on the council, as my love was affordable housing, and the need was evident way back then. And so there are many people here who I've worked with in the past who I really appreciate their efforts, and we have a great provider community, and when I say provider, not just services, but developer community in the city that knows how to do all the things the mayor was just talking about. And I really want to thank the mayor and the administration for putting this in the forefront. It is a critical issue. Nobody likes to hear that oh, well, it's not just here, it's everywhere. But that's true. We have a national crisis with housing. We need to look at all the best practices. Some of the way we've been doing housing in the past has been 40, 50 units, if we're lucky, every year on the average of multifamily. And of course, in recent past, next to no low density subsidized projects of any form. And we've had these arguments over the years with some of my most progressive neighborhoods that don't even want to have a secondary dwelling unit be allowed in their backyard or back on the alley. You know, we've got to change that discussion. We have to open up for our neighbors of all walks of life to be able to live and work here, as the mayor was saying. And that's going to take scale, the sheer numbers that the mayor was describing. And I've always advocated for, we've got so many vacant and abandoned properties and underutilized properties in this city. We've got to take advantage of that as well. I'm a believer in mixed income development. I think, you know, and that is really the definition of infill. And when we talk about infill development in the city and utilizing some of these completely underused properties or very much underused properties, that by definition can create a mixed income environment. And so, you know, the delivery of projects using low-income housing tax credits has been what we've relied on primarily. And those who are here who've been part of that understand the value of what they call soft money, which I don't know why that's soft. That's the local money to match federal programs, and in some cases just go right past them, because we can be quicker on our feet with local funding and state funding than we can typically with federal funding. And then I just want to touch on the need to preserve existing affordable housing and existing neighborhoods, and there's going to be a speaker from Prosperity Works about that. But that as well is not only maintaining existing affordable housing and keeping people from falling into being rental challenged or whatever it may be, being forced from a home ownership situation to a rental situation, but then just the sheer cost of paying the utilities, which we all know it's going up. It's going up drastically. Last but not least, I want to talk about regional cooperation. When I talk about region, I'm talking about the mid-state, mid-valley region of New Mexico, and we know we have a county with a housing authority, a city with a housing authority, all sorts of disparate work going on. And I am going to be introducing, along with Councilor Feeblecorn, who's here today, and Councilor Davis, a memorial asking the state to really look at our state regulations and what the state can do to help us collectively in our region, specifically Bernalillo County and Albuquerque, to be more robust and have a greater capacity in our housing development on the government side, and perhaps even with taxation authority. So all of these are very important. We're going to have a memorial. They're going to be introduced tonight on that. That's really just calling upon the state once again to help us out. But I think we have a willing partners at the state to do that. So so much to discuss. I'm really excited that this is in the forefront. And again, thanks to the mayor for doing that, and my fellow councilors who've really stepped up just in the recent past with greatly increased funding for the Workforce Housing Trust Fund, the city's trust fund that's been in place for a long time, and also for housing vouchers. We just have to keep plugging away at that. Vouchers are a big part of it as well, along with development of physical properties. So thanks everybody for being here.
Wind is being the wind.
No worries. And now, if anyone wants to adjust, I know the wind's tough. Nice work. Good use of the napkin. Bye. Oh, yeah, a little. Nice. Impressive work. Second term, man, we really got it down. All right, so thank you so much, Counselor. We want to hand it off to some members of the community who want to speak on this issue too, who are a big part of all things housing in Albuquerque. I want to mention one thing. We do have the plan up on our website. So I want to let you know there's a white paper that explains all of this in much more detail. And I think if you, what would sort of be a key word? Anyway, it's going to be in the press release. We'll send it out. So I want you to know there's a substantial white paper that outlines the need and the demand and the components and the changes and so forth. We'll put it in the press release for you. Okay, so, but let's do this. Let's pass it to Reverend Lavelle. Come on up while we fix these. I think you can just take these. Or I'll tell you what, I'll stand right here.
We'll take it to the side. Okay.
Oh, Pastor Landry, you're up. Come on up. Pastor Landry, who's from the International District. Thank you, Pastor.
Of course. Good afternoon, everybody. You know, the Compassion Service Center is a day and a night shelter in Southeast Albuquerque. And my heart is delighted when I hear of all the options of housing coming forth. I work with a lot of senior citizens. I have a gentleman on a walker that's going to be 80 years old. I have a lot of folks that are in their 60s. I work with disabled people there at the Compassion Center, children, and also just, you know, folks that have been living at the Phil Chacon Park and in alleys. And when we ask them, when they show up there on our streets with their baskets, and we ask them if they could just please move on, they ask me, where do we go? And this has been a huge, huge challenge, is where do these people go? So hearing that the city, and thank God for our mayor, and I know he's always looking for options in city council, thinking of the people, the most vulnerable, being able to say, for me to go back and say, hey guys, we are looking at some potential options for housing for you, because the rent is just off the charts. And if we can get a lot of this housing to come in and to fill some of these folks that are challenged with homelessness, or maybe they just are going to be losing their apartment for one reason or the other, I think that'd be awesome. So we are going to continue to serve folks and try to provide a home-like atmosphere for them. The Compassion Center is a beautiful model. It offers food, over 300 meals every day, over 50 nights of overnight shelter, and a full day shelter with showers, clothing, and other essentials to help our seniors, disabled, and our neighbors that are suffering from homelessness. So yes, thank you, Mayor Keller and City Councilor, for being willing to look at options and never giving up. Thank you.
Okay, and next up from the Urban Land Institute, been working on these issues for a long time in our community, Will Gleason.
Good afternoon. Will Gleason. I'm the chair of the Urban Land Institute New Mexico chapter. And the Urban Land Institute is actually a national and an international organization, nonpartisan, nonprofit that focuses on building a better built environment. So we are really a forum to help the city and the private side to figure out the best solutions. We've worked on this in other communities, and we have a lot of lessons to draw from across the nation and really across the globe. So we actually convened a workshop about actually 1 month ago called Solving Albuquerque's Housing Shortage. And we have a little report associated with that we're gonna put out. And it was it didn't solve all the issues, but it was a great forum that brought together people from the private side, from the city, from the nonprofit sector, and created a good dialogue for addressing these issues. Because as Councilor Benton said, the scale of this and the number of units we need really is going to require incredible collaboration between the city and the private side. And we think that ULI can play a role in that. We did a similar effort in Santa Fe about 5 years ago. We just brought together a bunch of people and said, why is it that no housing has been built here in the last 5 years? And we managed to set the city of Santa Fe on a path that resulted in them building more units last year actually than Albuquerque got built. And so that we think that that collaboration, that dialogue is key to solving this problem. And it won't take months, it'll take years, but there's a real urgency to it. And I think that the Urban Land Institute can really help push this forward. So thank you.
Now we want to pass it to Annalyn Hall from Prosperity Works.
Good morning. So I think it's pretty phenomenal that we're here on International Poverty Day to talk about housing in Albuquerque, because this is a key component of addressing poverty. Prosperity Works believes that solutions that support our community, having access to safe and affordable housing, are critical to our community. Home ownership is one piece of the housing solution, and it is critical because it is key to closing the wealth gap. Today, the typical Latinx household owns just 19 cents for every dollar of wealth of a white household. For Black families, it is 13 cents to every dollar. And what we see is that home ownership patterns follow racial wealth patterns. If we close the home ownership gap, the racial wealth gap would decrease by 30%. And what you need to know is that this home ownership gap is bigger than it was in the 1960s when housing discrimination was legal. Today, home ownership is unaffordable for the average person in 67% of counties nationally, and this is up 23% from last year. Prosperity Works has helped over 630 families purchase homes in New Mexico in the last 18 years through our asset building work. Our work uses out of poverty and ending poverty strategies, and we know that purchasing a home is one of the ways to help families get out of poverty. We've helped families make this investment in about 18 months. Our work advocates for policies that support this mission, including policies that help build wealth for all families. We need proactive and thoughtful strategies to support the housing crisis in Albuquerque, and that together, with the leadership that's present here today, we can make significant impacts. The housing initiatives announced today are part of the solutions to expand housing for our community and increase access for all. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And we'll take a couple of questions, or if they're for other folks, I'll call up kind of the relevant group. But I do want to mention one thing too. We also understand, that certain neighborhoods are going to have historic characterizations and so forth. So that all goes without saying. We wanted to share, though, a broad vision for the city. And so obviously that doesn't mean every single thing will be exactly the same in every single neighborhood. That's why we have the entire zoning and planning process. So we'll work through that over the next coming months. And lastly, with respect to the finance and conversions, just so folks know, With the money we have, we're going to pursue these conversions and rehab efforts in commercial and hotel spaces. We're going to do that through our Family and Community Services Department and the Housing Division. With respect to the zoning and issues around that, that obviously has to go through council. Council governs all zoning, and so they're going to have to work through all of that. We've simply put down a starting place. And with respect to the enforcement activities and so forth, that lead is going to be through our Office of Civil Rights and Consumer Protection, but that may also include things like the DA and the AG and other entities that handle that side of the situation. And lastly, the workforce housing issues will primarily be handled, of course. That program through JTA is done by our Economic Development Department. So it's a real one Albuquerque effort, plus all the partners and private sector folks involved. And so with that, we can take some questions. Also, thank you, Councilor Feeblecorn, for being here as well. And whatever questions folks have. Okay.
Do you guys have any conversions in mind, or are these just 10 possible buildings that you guys would at a later date?
Sure. So, and first we should, on a personal note, pause and welcome Shannon Jackson to the city of Albuquerque. This is her first press conference. So, be nice to her. Anyway, so we do have a few hotels that we've been talking to. We also know, though, that there are zoning and code issues, even with respect to those conversions, that have to do with either the number of sinks or whether or not you have a stove. So there are a lot of things we have to work through to even enable those. But the short story is hotels are the low-hanging fruit. They are the cheapest to convert, and they're also in Albuquerque the most available, meaning there's sellers who are interested in getting out. We all know the dilapidated hotels and so forth. So that's our low-hanging fruit we're focused on. But we do know downtown especially there's vacant office space, and so that's where we're really targeting those efforts. But again, those all do require some legislative changes.
Jessica, you said you wanted to do 5,000 new units by 2025. Can you put that in perspective? How many have you been doing each of the last 5 years?
We can, and it's in the report that we're going to send you. But Carol, do you want to do that off the top of your head? All right, we're going to have to send you the report, but I think we have a graph on that. Yeah, we also have all the numbers on vouchers, if you were going to ask about that, also in the report.
I have one more question. Is that okay? I mean, I know Councilor Benton proposed a casitas ordinance 6 or 7 years ago that failed. What do you do? Because I already imagine that there's going to be neighborhoods that come forward with any of these zoning changes and say, this changes the character of our neighborhood, this is not what we want houses to look like. How are you going to combat that at the council level?
So I'll bring up, obviously, Councilor Benton, but I do want to mention that that's why I said what I said earlier about there are opportunities for historic overlays for historic neighborhoods and so forth. That doesn't go away, but Ike's the expert on this.
I would just start by saying, again, Albuquerque is a very diverse city. I think there's a tradition of multi-generational housing on individual sites in Albuquerque and in New Mexico, and obviously all over the world. We in the United States have, I'm still not sure exactly how it all came about, but we've, I think in the age of the automobile, we've sprawled and everybody had the luxury at that time of having their own little plot for just their immediate family and no one else. We really don't have that luxury anymore. And I think as far as overcoming obstacles to that, when Will was talking, it made me think we have many, many good examples that we can show people. I mean, and the impact is so minor to have a small secondary dwelling unit on a lot that can accommodate one. And this is the other thing that didn't really come through when we had the debate before was, we're going to have every house in our neighborhood with one of these. That's probably not even physically possible. So only certain properties are going to be suitable for it. And we should take the multi-generational issue into account because we have an aging population, and there's a lot to be said for that help, and for younger families as well to be able to live on the same property. So, how you overcome it, I think, is greatly going to be, and I think the discussion is changing in the country of the understanding of the crisis that we have, appealing to people's best selves, and that it's the right thing to do. We can put safeguards in, this is an important thing for us to do, but in terms of scale, it's probably one of the least the least effective in terms of really scaling up, because it's not going to be every house is going to be creating one. As good as I can do.
Yeah, if I could, I'm not sure if this is for the counselor or the mayor, but dovetailing off of what Jessica was saying, what beyond casitas, are you going for anything else? I mean, there's other cities and states that have eliminated the single-family zone altogether, outright permissive use of duplexes, permissive triplexes, eliminating parking requirements. What's the direction of travel you all are headed in there?
I don't know. I haven't really spoken in detail with the planning department about what they have in mind, but I think we need to be flexible. Again, every neighborhood's different. Some places have huge lots that are legacy lots. I mean, should they be limited to just one secondary dwelling unit? Should they be opened up to like a little bit more? So I think we need to look at the code across the board and push the limit as far as we can, and provide protection. So. In my book, I would say no. The answer is no. We would not just be limited to just the casita model, single, but certainly not changing zoning to apartment zoning in an existing fabric.
Other questions?
What is the limit you're proposing on short-term rentals, and how many are there now? Can you get into that in some detail?
Yeah, this is an issue which I'll just preface with that is, even in the Conference of Mayors world and so forth, this is a real struggle how to regulate short-term rentals with respect to housing demand. And I'll also be straightforward. We might have to follow up with you on that. I'm just going to look at our team. Anyone want to talk short-term rentals? I think we're going to have to follow up with you on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. Obviously we need more low-income housing, but when we talk about the housing situation and you're mentioning access for all, there is a category of people who don't necessarily qualify for help or low-income projects, but are just beyond that threshold and can't really afford to just go out and get an apartment. How do you address the needs for those people as well?
Yeah, this is good. We did not say this is just about low-income housing. So I want to be really clear. This is not. This is about all units of housing. It's, that 13,000 to 30,000 units includes all types. And we know in Albuquerque, we're actually inverted from most cities. Downtown, we have higher percentage of supportive and affordable housing than we do market rate. Like, the irony is the shortage is actually market rate downtown. We're like the opposite of every other city. And around downtown, we need more affordable housing. Most cities are the exact opposite. So this is actually sort of need blind, but it's need sensitive to the fact of the disparities among different income groups and ethnic groups that we talked about. So we have to address both those issues. But a massive chunk of the 30,000 units has to just be market rate.
Mayor, could I ask you to weigh in on the question I asked Councilor Benson? Are you letting the council
Sure.
take the lead on this one, or what's your ideal scenario for how this looks?
Yeah, I would just say I think we need to really think about what's the default. So the default in Albuquerque is no, 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 no. And I think it needs to be, there's an exception here, there's an exception there. That's fine. But the default needs to be yes. That's really what we've got to shift.
Okay, so it doesn't sound like there's a lot of specific language in bill form yet. Is that in the release language?
Well, at this moment, no, but our planning department has been working with all the individuals on all sorts of specifics. So specifics coming, But I would say this, no matter what the specifics are, it's my job as mayor to provide guidance. And my guidance is we got to just change the default.
Any other questions? Okay.
Seeing the economic climate that we're in, especially with rising interest rates, is that going to have any bearing on the development that we're doing right now?
Absolutely. It has to be taken into consideration, and that's partially why we're looking at this housing support fund and the $750,000 that we're starting with. That probably needs to be much bigger, and that's also why a huge chunk of the housing has to be supportive and affordable. And so we know that that is the only way as a city we can deal with that, right? Like we can't influence interest rates and so forth. It's also why we have to enforce on the sort of the price gouging by renters, or not by renters, by leasers. And so that's key to that part of the plan that we mentioned with respect to enforcement. All right, thanks everybody. Have a good one.